Hello, and it's good to have you join us again on Maritime Radar. Nigeria, situated along the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa, boasts of a vast coastline that stretches over 853 kilometers, 200 nautical miles, and encompasses a maritime territory abundant with untapped potential worth $296 billion. At 90 trillion naira, based on 2017 estimates, the value of Nigeria's maritime assets is about 10 times the size of Nigeria's budget of 2018 at 9.12 trillion naira. Nigeria's maritime assets have long remained a source of intrigue, offering a treasure trove of opportunities for economic growth, strategic development, and international trade. As Nigeria seeks to diversify its economy and leverage its natural resources, harnessing its maritime assets has emerged as a pivotal agenda for the Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy. The Nigerian Coast Guard bill focused on ensuring regional coastal security in adherence to international maritime standards are some of the issues that will be on the front burner on today's show. I'm Norma Obiaswalo. A bill to establish the Nigerian Coast Guard has passed second reading in the Senate, and the public hearing slated for November 6th was shifted. The Nigerian Coast Guard bill is designed to enhance Nigeria's maritime security, focusing on regional coastal security and in adherence to international maritime standards. The Nigerian Coast Guard would act as a specialized support service to the Nigerian Navy, particularly during wartime, enhancing the country's overall defense capabilities. The proposed legislation aims to safeguard Nigeria's maritime interests and uphold regional coastal security by aligning with international standards and norms for maritime security and enforcing relevant laws within Nigeria's maritime zones, helping to preserve lives and property. This episode looks at the significance of this bill on this administration's development agenda to expand economic opportunities of Nigeria's ocean resources. Before we get further into today's lineup on the program, let's find out the latest in maritime news.
The new Commissioner of Police in charge of the Ports Authority Police, Western Command, Apapa Lagos, Ibrahim Balarabe Kaba, who assumed office in September as the 32nd holder of that role, paid the first of its kind courtesy visit to the Maritime Workers Union of Nigeria Secretariat. The President General, who noted that this is the first time a Commissioner of Police has visited the Secretariat, expressed his happiness and pledged the union's support.
The only thing we have for you is to work with you, to support you, because if there's no crisis in the port, the Abuja will not call you for questioning. But if there's crisis upon crisis in the port, they'll be asking you what is going on in that place. Our own is to support you to make sure that there won't be any crisis, there won't be any trouble coming from the angle of Maritime Workers Union of Nigeria. Even if any other agents or agency wanted to behave funny, we will support to make sure that they see reason for not introducing what we call legalism or thuggery against your administration.
The visit aims to foster collaboration for seamless operations, ensuring maximum security and facilitating trade at Nigeria's ports.
The trend now in the world is community policing. So police cannot be isolated or cannot work in isolation. We work with our stakeholders, and mainly in the port corridors. The main stakeholders, one of the main stakeholders we have is the Maritime Union of Nigeria. So that is why I deem it necessary to come here and visit my friends and my brothers so that we can improve on the existing level of cordial level of relationship that we have been having all this while.
Stakeholders look forward to him bringing his wealth of experience to his new role at the Ports Authority Police Command. Security personnel working at Madagascar's major ports have received essential training in identifying potential security threats and taking action to mitigate risks to port facilities. a national workshop for port workers with designated security duties was held in Madagascar as part of a port security project funded by the European Union and jointly implemented by the International Maritime Organization, the International Criminal Police Organization, and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. The training was based on IMO Model Course 3.24, securing training for port facility personnel with designated security duties, which enhances knowledge and skills for port staff to perform their duties in line with key IMO safety and security instruments. These include the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, and related guidelines. The training included both theoretical lessons and practical exercises for 27 civilian and military personnel from Madagascar's Maritime Administration, the Gendarmerie Nationale, and Immigration Services. Participants, including port facility security officers, access control officers, port authority staff, and relevant port facility managers, were able to share expertise and exchange best practices in port security and the safety of navigation.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Maritime Radar. African Union reports that the blue economy contributes $300 billion to Africa's economy, as Nigeria's untapped blue economy potential is put at $296 billion. But the surge in these economic activities on Nigeria's waterways brought with it increased security challenges that has threatened livelihoods, economies of nations, and individuals. In adherence to international maritime standards, the Nigerian Navy and the Coast Guard are two distinct maritime forces with different primary roles, responsibilities, and operational focus. Therefore, collaboration becomes imperative. In this chat, with Rear Admiral Francis Akpan, retired, former FOC, Naval Training Command, Nigerian Navy, and Chief of Administration, Naval Headquarters, FOC, Western Naval Command, shares on the Nigerian Coast Guard Bill as a duplication and the need for the Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy to concentrate on policies that will drive ocean resources, create jobs, and ensure economic growth. Stay with us. It's good to have you join us on the show, sir.
Thank you, and welcome to my little home. I hope that your stay will be pleasant enough.
Sure. The bill, let's get to it. The bill to establish the Nigerian Coast Guard, which should drive the implementation of maritime regulation, has passed the second reading. How did this come to you?
Curious, but on a second thought, if we go back a little into history, in our country, the Coast Guard Bill had surfaced maybe for this fifth time since since the year 1980. This is the fifth time it's coming up. So it looks like something that happens every 4 years, 4 or 5 years. 8 years ago it surfaced. We were all in National Assembly to debate about its relevance. 4 years after, it came with another title, Deep Blue Project. But of course, the undercurrent was for a Coast Guard. And all the elements, all the fundamentals of the Deep Blue, the ships, the aircraft, the helicopters, the tanks, not the APCs, the vessels, interceptor vessels, are all with the Navy. You know, and the one before, and this also, 4 years ago, also had elements of drones. They are all with the Navy as part of the Navy assets. Indeed, the former president ordered that all those platforms should be handed over to the Navy for maintenance and, of course, for operational uses. So one is surprised. In 2021, there was a bill from NIMASA which states that they were going to have a new bill to replace that of 2007. In that bill were introductions of stuff like NIMASA will be responsible for security, but the caption read Administration and Safety Agency. But in its context, part of the bill read things like they will be responsible for security, they will be responsible for maritime air interdiction, they will be responsible for enforcement. So you find this is also replicated in the bill that has had second reading in the Senate, with issues like sea lift, security, and being part of the armed forces of Nigeria. Those are the curious aspects of the bill. It's not just because it's Coast Guard bill, but it's giving itself another vim, another strength, as having to be a part of the armed forces, as having to be the one that will provide sea lift for the army and other contingents of amphibious operations. And of course, the aspect that it will be responsible for air maritime interdiction again. And along and adjunct to that is the fact that it already has a Coast Guard fund. So this, of course, will stir up curiosity for those that are interested in the maritime prospect of our country. That is the curious part.
Oh, okay, looking at the functions of the Nigerian Navy and the functions of the Nigerian Coast Guard, do you see any merit having this Coast Guard? Because I think, looking at it, researching about it, that they have two different functions, the Nigerian Navy and the Nigerian Coast Guard. So it should be complementing each other. I don't know. But so how do you think this comes? Do you see any merit in it?
There's a global responsibility on roles for navies. Military, which is military defense of littoral states like Nigeria. The second is the policing aspect. The policing aspect of this global responsibility is the Coast Guard duties of navies. In the next one, or the last but not the least, is the diplomatic aspect, which has to do with the show of strength of state visits to other maritime states. Since the thought of having a maritime department in 1885 started, before the First World War, where the Royal Navy had the Marine Department to counter that of the Germans in Cameroon, up to the time that the bill that was passed for establishing the Navy has always been accorded the Coast Guard duties of Nigeria. In any term that you want to look at it, it has always been accorded the responsibility for Coast Guard functions of Nigeria, which is the policing functions of navies.
Oh, okay. That means, in your view, you think Nigerian Navy has been doing very well with the functions of the Coast Guard, right?
It has been doing extremely well.
Okay. So then who has the responsibility for the enforcement of IMO conventions?
Most of the enforcements are being carried out by the Navy: anti-fishing rights, anti-smuggling, piracy. Most of these enforcements, the Navy have done it in the past. And surprisingly, it has also established a guard post, a maritime guard post in Namasa to assist them in ensuring some of these enforcements are duly done, are properly done.
Okay, according to you, so under what standard operating procedure is the Nigerian Navy engaging the commercial ships?
Commercial ships that are indulged in fraudulent activities like ship-to-ship transfers, crude oil theft to feeding to mother vessels waiting at sea to collect crude oil that have been stolen from our resources. It also bought ships, merchant ships, where you could class them as merchant ships, trawlers that are fishing without rights or without approvals. It also has the responsibility for the environmental cleaning of our own maritime space. For example, if you are caught pouring out your bilges or throwing out waste in the sea, in the oceans, the Navy has the responsibility to arrest. So it's been doing the enforcement of all these maritime laws from the time of inception till date. It has.
So practically, in your view, you think this is an overlapping function?
It's not an overlap, it's a duplication.
Oh.
It's a duplication. It's not threatening the existence of the Navy, but it's trying to do. In fact, the duplication of the Navy roles have been on the bill for the past 10 years. There was a time in which Nemasa said it was responsible and has a strategy called C4, I4, and R. Those were the strategic naval strategy for containing all the threats that we experience as a maritime state. Those are the strategies that the Navy churned out. And what did we find a week or two after? Nemasa adopted it as their own maritime strategy. So this is not the first time we are seeing maritime agencies trying to duplicate the functions of the Navy. When they went out for the hydrographic survey of Nigeria, we had other maritime agencies wanting to do hydrographic survey for Nigeria. But by and large, I think the Hydrographic Act has been passed, giving the responsibility solely to the Navy, but with partnership with NIMASA, MPA, and other maritime agencies.
Okay, your response shows that you are totally against Coast Guard and that Nigerian Navy have done the duties of the Coast Guard very well. So when we say, what of search and rescue, what is happening with illegal fishing, looking at the loss of 35 billion naira annually. So what have happened with oil spill if Nigerian Navy have done very well?
Well, oil spillage, maritime security is the collective thing with a hegemony like the Navy, but in concert with other maritime agencies like NIMASA, MP, the Environmental Department, NIWA, the Police Marine Department, and all of them. This is the only country where we are not doing the all of government efforts, because you will find that these various departments have their own maritime domain awareness system, they have their own vessels, and they have their own platforms. But I think that if you look at the endeavors of other nations, maritime nations, this is normally should be a collective endeavor so that we can attain an all of government effort towards ensuring that we have a maritime domain that is conducive for business. If we do that, the Navy has established the Falcon Eye, the Maritime Domain Awareness System that ships from Cameroon to Ivory Coast. The Navy has seats for the various agencies I've just mentioned. Seats in the commands and in naval headquarters. I think it's only MP that has come up to occupy the desired seats both at the naval headquarters and at the various commands. I want to suggest that maritime community can be reintroduced where intelligence is shared, duties and roles are shared, and this kind of duplicity of efforts will stop. When Navy established its Maritime Domain Awareness System of Halcona in 2017, the MASA came up with the Deep Blue, and of course I think the MPA has its own system. And all of government effort is what we think will be the best for the country, because that is what other climes are doing. When you talk about Coast Guard, people bring the issue of the American Coast Guard, and of course the Coast Guard functions in the UK. The Coast Guard in the United Kingdom is responsible for distress and search and rescue. It's not responsible for maritime security of the United Kingdom. The Coast Guard in the US, which is under the Secretary of Home Security, is responsible for the totality of America's territorial waters, the safety and its security. Because the American Navy is busy out in with wider fleets in all oceans of the world. So to be able to look after her backwaters, the United States Coast Guard was established for that purpose. We do not have extraterritorial ambitions. Nigeria does not, because I have not found that in our foreign policy. So when we start looking at these Coast Guard issues, people get skeptical. And what you will throw into the West African subregion and what have you will be an arms race to also develop such collateral Coast Guards. For now, I think the Nigerian Navy is doing very well, extremely well, in its Coast Guard duties. And I think she should be encouraged. If there are gaps, it must come out of a systematic way through either analysis, threat analysis, through SWOT analysis, to be able to look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing our maritime domain. Therein, we can now say categorically, these are the gaps and the lacunas. If we don't do that, you begin to give people the idea that there's an ulterior motive behind this recurring decimal of wanting a Coast Guard every 4 years. That is the way I think we should go about it.
We've been looking at the Coast Guard bill, whether we should have it or we shouldn't have it. But we are due for a break. When we return, we'll be looking at the blue economy and what policies that should drive our ocean resources. But that will be after this short break. Please stay with us.
Africa needs its own storytellers, people who understand the continent because they're from it. People who know that news is more than just a conversation starter, it's our stories. Because these stories run deeper than headlines and segments. It's about digging deeper to get the facts and telling the human side of every single story, not just the echoes from foreign headlines and perspectives. It's time to take back our narratives and share them in our voices. The birth of Africa's New Age reporting, and this is where it begins, right here at News Central TV, with stories that put Africa first.
Welcome back if you're just joining us. This is Maritime Raid, and I still have with me Rear Admiral Francis Akpan, retired. He is the former FOC Naval Training Command, Nigerian Navy.
And former FOC Western Naval Command.
Okay.
Back to back.
Okay, before we went on that break, we've been talking about the bill of the Coast Guard, but now we want to move to the blue economy and how to drive our ocean resources. But let us start with looking at the scope of interpretation of the term blue economy. How will you define blue economy?
Blue economy is the 21st century economic strategy for maritime nations. It's the current trend. It's the ways and means of exploring our maritime resources, but creating a balance between sustaining the ecosystem, making it habitable, more habitable, that's the word, more habitable, and ensuring that whatever exploits we carry out in the maritime domain, we're able to sustain that balance between economic resources and development, and ensuring that there's a conducive habitat for the inhabitants of the littoral to gain from the exploit of the blue economy. The blue economy actually is part of the SDG project of the United Nations, SDG I think 14, which lies below the water. And that is where maritime states are exploring for their future existence. Initially, it was the brown economy, remember the land spaces, but if you know the competition over land tenureship, border stripes, wars, it has deprived nations of their land space for development. So the new trend, the 21st century, is to go to the sea.
So what is the worth? I know the global is over $40 trillion. So what is the worth or potential of Nigeria's blue economy?
Huge. Huge. Let's just look at the fundamentals. First, there is shipping, which really prescribes aquaculture than the artisanal fishing style we've adopted. Because if you look at trawling and fishing in the deep sea, we're not doing very well in that aspect. We're losing jobs, we're losing catches. But like I said, with the Falcon Eye, Maritime Domain Awareness System, those will be poachers have left Nigerian waters. But we still have an extended responsibility to cooperate with other West African states that have lesser marine capabilities to protect them from poachers in their waters. But if you look at the losses from Nigeria, it should bother you. But when you look at the losses, that is almost $1 billion per year in West Africa, that should also bother you, especially around the Gulf of Guinea, where we share responsibilities for enabling maritime security. The second fundamental is that of shipping. Nigeria has 291 vessels, 33 positions in the world. That is not enough. We have a shortfall. Also over 5,000 maritime workforce, which means we're not producing enough for our maritime academies. Even though we're engaging foreign maritime academies, we're not doing enough. And that's a huge workforce. And we need to close that gap. If you look at the Philippines and Bangladesh and India, what they're doing from their maritime workforce is huge. The return of diaspora investment, those in diaspora, is huge compared to Nigeria. The other part is the port development infrastructural program and strategy. Our ports are still run with analog systems. Most ports are looking at your cargo arrives in 24 hours, it's cleared. We need to get to that level so that other people don't take other regional hubs, for example, our neighboring countries, I won't mention names, but that we need to develop our port to the level where we can do such things. We also haven't exploited the mineral resources from zinc, platinum. It's huge. There's also the biodiversity at sea. People are saying that within the Gulf of Guinea and Nigeria in particular, we'll be looking at about 500,000 specimens of plutons that will enable us to go into pharmaceuticals and other endeavors of life at sea. If you look at what they call the lower hanging fruits, ferry services, maritime culture and tourism, we have not done any bit. Those are areas that could attract up to 1 million workforce. There used to be regattas, maritime regattas. I'm happy that Lagos State is bringing it back, Cross River State, River State, Delta State. We need to bring that as part of the eco-tourist system and network it properly. These are the responsibilities of the new Ministry of Maritime and Blue Economy.
Our industry has been quite quiet. What do you want to see? Maybe in the next 6 months?
In the next 6 months, you mean the maritime industry?
Yes, maritime industry.
Policy to drive the subsector. Sectoral policies. Bills that will go to ensure that we engage the clusters of ministries that will reinvent the wheel in the marine and blue economy. We should be talking about stringent policies. Tapping from the SDG goals and what have you from IMO and the other global establishments that are standing by to support Nigeria's marine and blue economy ministry.
The potential in the marine and blue economy is huge. We, Admiral, have mentioned a lot of it. A lot of it is huge. So what we want to see now is policies that will drive our industry. It's been Rear Admiral Francis Akpan, retired. He's the former FOC Naval Training Command, Nigerian Navy, and Western
Naval
Command. Thank you very much for your time and thoughts. I hope the minister is listening, and we work on this. What we expect is what? Policies. Policies.
Strategic policies.
Strategic policies. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And that's our show this week. I hope this episode has been able to give adequate clarification on the role of the Nigerian Navy, Nigerian Coast Guard, and the proposed collaboration for maritime security. Join us every week on Maritime Radio as we explore potentials that will ensure the development of the maritime sector in Africa. You can also expect the latest in global and local maritime news, plus industry insights right here. I'm Norma Obiaswalo. Many thanks for your time, and see you again next week.